Good evening. My name is Talani Alumade. I am the Social Action Chair for the Albany, New York Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And this evening we are going to bring you a great presentation, panel discussion on See Me, Find Me, human trafficking and missing persons of people of color, specifically women of color, women and girls of color. Today we will bring you 4 experts in their fields to discuss the impact of women of color and girls of color with respect to how we are treated in the media, what happens when we do go missing and when we are found, and how this may evolve, whatever the circumstances are, into human trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking of the sorts. So today, our moderator today is Rosie Love. She is a social worker, sole practitioner, and just really quickly, I have 2 housekeeping things that I will take care of. The first thing is our emergency management message, and really quickly, welcome to our Delta Sigma Theta's community event. We are delighted you chose to be with us today. We want you to have a wonderful experience. Please be assured your safety as well as your enjoyment of the event are our utmost concern. Please take a moment to look around and identify 2 exits nearest to you. We must always be Delta ready. In the event it is necessary for a quick and orderly emergency evacuation. Also, since we are dealing with COVID-19, please remember to wear your mask. If you feel the need, wash your hands, and always walk and stand the distance that is appropriate for you to feel safe. Please enjoy the event and continue to be safe. Welcome. Now, I just wanted to show a very quick clip of the series Found. It is on NBC, it is in season 1, and it shows a person who is tasked to look for missing people that would otherwise not be either looked for in the media because of who they are, how they're represented in the community, and the stakes that she takes to go through to find them. Kiara, can you help me get the light?
Righteous, empathetic, heroic. Just a few of the words used to describe you. Considering that you saved yourself from your kidnapper when you were 16 years old, I have to ask, does it haunt you that your kidnapper was never found?
Haunt? No. We find missing people who have slipped through the cracks, and we bring them home. I am going to find your son. Your parents sent me to find you. You're safe.
We need to talk about how you figured out this location before us cops.
You planted a hidden camera.
We all have our secrets. New case. Where would you have taken her? I won't let what you did to me be for nothing. Whatever it takes. I tell you what to help with, and you help with it.
Quite the partnership.
We're not partners. You're a monster.
You think you're not like me?
The ones that no one else seems to be looking for. We find them, and we return them safely.
You are so self-righteous.
You kidnapped a child.
And you kidnapped a man.
That house is a mini prison. Fulfilled the profile.
I trained you well.
You can't manipulate me.
But I did. Your clients would never be found if it weren't for me. Tell me that you need me.
You think you're in control, but you're not.
Tell me that I'm your partner.
Wherever you are. You want to be here, don't you?
Remove the chain and find out.
Found, October 3rd on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
Thank you. So while this is dramatized, and I don't encourage kidnapping or kidnappers or anyone for that matter, or any vigilante sort of activities, it goes to show that there are people that, quite frankly, society is not willing to be found. According to the FBI, as of November 2023, There has been 281,000 missing cases that they have categorized, and 43% of those cases are BIPOC women and girls of color. So it shows the great need that we need to emphasize in bringing this information to the forefront and ensuring that our women and children are safe as well. New York has done a great step into creating the task force for BIPOC missing women and children. So we are, as a state, are going in the right direction, but we want to see more. And we're going to hear more from our panelists about what we can do to bring our girls home. So I'm going to hand it over to Rosie Love, our moderator, and she will then introduce the panelists. Thank you.
See me, find me. See me, find me. See me, find me. Thank you, Soro Almade, for that beautiful introduction. We are excited to be here tonight, but we're also humbled to be here tonight to discuss this very important issue. Before me tonight, we have 4 distinguished panelists who will lead us through an important conversation. First, we have Julina. Wow. Can you raise your hand? Julina is the Director of Human Trafficking Prevention at New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. We also have State Trooper Bobbie Alexander, who is with the New York State Police. We also have Anzala Alozie, who is the Director of Energy and Climate Equity for NYSERDA. And last, but certainly not least, we have JoLynn, Coordinator of Community Education at the Albany County Crime and Sexual Violence Center. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Before we do though, I just want to say for those in our audience, this is a very serious topic and we don't know what people walk into the room with. And so we want to make sure that if you need time to take a break, there's a bathroom, a restroom right outside the front. These doors right here, just go to your right. There's refreshments in the back, including water and some snacks as well. So do what needs to be done to take care of you. This evening, our questions will be divided into 3 parts. The first section will cover some of the background information around human trafficking. The second part will go into some of the systemic issues that promote, mitigate, or sustain human trafficking. And lastly, we'll round out the event by talking a little bit about some of the trauma effects and how to be person-centered in our approach to dealing with human trafficking. And so our esteemed guests will lead us through all 3 portions, and we will conclude with a few questions from the audience. Okay, so now these questions, I would just ask that if it touches your heart to respond, that you can do so. We don't have to spend a lot of time on each of the questions, okay? So what is human trafficking? Who wants to tackle that for us?
I can start maybe on the definition of human trafficking. So when we think about human trafficking, generally there are 2 types of trafficking that we think about. There is sex trafficking and also labor trafficking. And on the broad scale, what human trafficking is when someone is forced to either commit commercial sex acts or perform any type of labor. And so they can be either forced or coerced or perhaps even frauded into performing such activity. So just on the broadest scale, that is what we're looking at, is if there's any element of force, fraud, or coercion in the performance of commercial sex acts or any type of labor. And I also want to just make the distinction that for children, so for anyone under the age of 18, and we have a wonderful safe harbor program in our state and in our county here in Albany as well, that for any children who may be survivors of sex trafficking, that because they're minors, no element of force, fraud, or coercion is necessary. The very fact that they've been asked to or are engaging in commercial sex is sufficient to deem them survivors of sex trafficking.
So just a quick question of clarification. You mentioned labor trafficking. So if someone is working at a job and they're not being paid appropriately for their work, how do you distinguish between that type of labor, is that labor trafficking or is that labor exploitation, and what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it comes up actually quite often, and sometimes the line between, wage and hour violations and labor trafficking may not be so clear. I would say that in a scenario like that, that is definitely a red flag and a potential indicator of labor trafficking. When we think about labor trafficking, we want to, again, establish the elements of force, fraud, or coercion. So if somebody is being underpaid or not paid at all for their labor, but they're still continuing to perform the labor because maybe the employer has threatened them that if you don't continue, I will harm you or your family, or I will report you to immigration perhaps, or to the authorities. That is an exercise of power and manipulation over that individual. And something like that could make someone feel like they're forced to continue working, even for low wages or no wages at all in certain cases. So I would say in that situation that that is a labor violation, and that is a potential red flag for labor trafficking, and we would look to ask more questions about the force, fraud, and coercion piece to better understand the circumstances that the person was forced to work in and to continue to work in.
Excellent, thank you for that clarification. Does anyone want to add to that?
I do want to add that, just in preparation when I started looking into, the questions and things that would be coming up, I started specifically going through the New York State penal law just to see, what are the parameters for, kidnapping and custodial interference and, unlawful imprisonment. And it does specifically address labor trafficking as a crime under the New York State penal law. It does not speak to sex trafficking, which I also found interesting. So, I just wanted to add that.
I will say that I think there is a portion of the penal law that is on sex trafficking and also on the sex trafficking of a child, but it's in a completely different portion.
Okay, so it's not in the,
yeah,
the
it's actually
related
quite
offenses.
confusing because they're not grouped together at all. So I think labor trafficking is somewhere else, and then sex trafficking and sex trafficking of a child are together in another different portion.
You know what, now that you mention it's probably under sex crimes, and I specifically just took the kidnapping related offenses.
But that's an interesting conversation, because if it's in two different places, then how does one know exactly where to go in order to find what they need regarding it? So maybe we can even talk about that a little bit more later on, talk about some of the structural issues and sex and human trafficking. Can someone paint a picture for me? Who are the victims of human trafficking? Like, who is vulnerable? Who's at most at risk? What does that group look like?
Well, we always really want to stress that anybody can be a victim, just like anybody can be a perpetrator. But like you mentioned before, it does hit the BIPOC community at a higher rate. Children who are estranged from family have more vulnerabilities. People who are part of any kind of system, whether it's foster care, juvenile detention, anything like that, are at a bigger risk and more vulnerability. Yeah, but really anybody can be a victim.
And I really want to thank you for that and really elevate and flag painting the picture that young girls of color, especially Black girls and girls of color, are victims and often targeted for some of those same vulnerabilities that you just discussed in terms of perhaps instability at home or whether perhaps they have experienced intimate partner violence or sexual assault. So really ensuring that we deliberately understand that girls of color and women of color are victims and can be victims, while anyone can be a victim of trafficking as well.
Okay, I think that's important to highlight during this conversation. What in particular leaves Black and Indigenous children at risk more so than other groups? And we're just talking,
Yep.
so
Yep.
it's
It's
not,
conversation.
we don't have to have references to back it up.
Yeah.
From your experience and all the great work that all of you do in the community, what are some of the things that you see?
I think a lot of times, socioeconomic issues
Talk
play a
about
part.
that. Yeah.
A lot of times when you're thinking about children and their home lives and their family lives, a lot of times if they're coming from a background of a, lower economic status, the parents are working more. So that leaves them out of the home without supervision, and it gives the opportunity for predators, different people who they encounter to move in because parents are working, they're not around, they're trying to keep a roof over their head, food in their mouth, so I think that's one thing.
To add to that, I would also say the historic systemic perception and oppression of young people of color, women of color, in that they can't be victimized. And so it can sometimes lead predators to think that it's a great target. They're great targets because systems will not believe their experiences and stories. And again, there is a historic power and control dynamic that is very part of many people of color's lives. And so being able to, I don't want to use the word capitalize on that, but to maximize the potential to groom in certain ways because of the lack of disbelief that women of color, girls of color are victims just by itself for the mere fact that they're women of color.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen studies like that will show that young women of color are often perceived to be much older than they are, more sexually active than what they may be, simply because of the color of their skin. So thank you for raising that point. And is there anything else that creates this vulnerability for Black and Indigenous young women?
I'll also say that I think sometimes, from my experience, not quite at DCJS, but in prior experience of representing sex traffickers in immigration cases, that there sometimes are family or community dynamics where a person may not feel very comfortable speaking out about their experiences. In many cases, we see that the trafficker is someone that they actually know, that a child or a woman or a man or any individual knows. And they're either acquaintances or they may even be a romantic partner or a family member. And in those cases, I think it's very, very difficult for somebody, including especially children, to really know who to trust and who to speak about about those issues. So I think there's sometimes a lot of those dynamics involved as well that make it not quite a outwardly healthy or safe environment for someone to share what they've been experiencing.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Julina? Okay. I think your point hits on the issue of especially how trauma impacts people differently. So, for example, especially if you have a partner who is someone who you know intimately, right? Then you have to begin to question, is this bad? Actually, the thing that's happening to me is actually bad. So I can see how victims or survivors have a difficult time struggling with that. So thank you so much for all that insight. If it's okay, if anyone doesn't have anything else to add, we can move on to the second section, which really dives a little bit deeper into the systemic issues. Actually, before we do, because we have a tendency, I think, to focus on the survivors, but not necessarily the perpetrators. So in the same spirit, if you had to describe who the perpetrators are, what do they look like? What are we dealing with here? How could we identify them?
The issue is you can't really identify them. Like I do in anti-trafficking group with at-risk youth, and part of the curriculum is we have a set of 10 pictures, all different nationalities, ages, genders, and we ask them who they think the traffickers are. And it ends up being that they all are and have been convicted of trafficking. But again, we have a young woman in a cheerleader uniform who has who was convicted of trafficking one of her other teammates through Backpage. We have a pastor, we have a firefighter, an Army recruit. And so it just really showcases that. And you know, a lot of people again think it's that kidnapping, that stranger danger again. And it really, like you said, it's more of the families that are starting to traffic more, gang initiations and getting into that, being in that trafficking field. And those romantic partnerships, you start off as boyfriend and girlfriend, and then it's okay, you need to do this to help me out, I can't pay rent. So it's a one-time thing, and then it keeps going and snowballing and getting bigger and bigger.
Thank you for that. Anything to add, anyone?
No, I would just, like to say how important painting that picture again and really demonstrating the diversity of experiences that include trafficking. Because I think oftentimes when you talk about it on a community level, folks think it's, it requires out of state, out of country travel, and it has a very different lens to it. And what you have just shared is really important for us to understand that it can be, it could be anyone, and it can be really close to home and right in our neighborhoods, happening in ways that aren't often depicted in media.
I would also like to say that a lot of times, and I find this in pretty much across the board when you're looking at different crimes and the perpetrators, especially when it comes to crimes against persons, a lot of times your perpetrators were victims at one point too. A lot of times, and they carry hurt, anger, different, their mental state, it all ties in together. So it becomes a cycle as well.
Absolutely.
That's very important, thank you.
The only thing I might want to just add is I think oftentimes also traffickers, it's important to be aware that they are not lone wolves, that they operate oftentimes within a network of sophisticated individuals who stay undetected, but have different roles in the trafficking network and operation. So I think oftentimes it's hard to pinpoint, who all the traffickers are, because maybe there's one person who's the pimp, who's out on the streets with the girls and the women, but then there's also other individuals working in the backstage who are, either dealing financially with the money or with customer relations, Johns, or other types of roles that they might play. And so I definitely agree that the traffickers, what we see, really are diverse. They come from all gamuts of society, all socioeconomic statuses, all types of professions, and it makes it additionally a little bit more challenging because so many of them play this backstage role.
Now, we know that in New York State, anyway, that sex work is, for the most part, is illegal. However, how do we make a distinction between someone involved in voluntary sex work and someone who's being trafficked?
I can just jump in really quickly. So part of my job at DCJS is to operate what's known as the New York State confirmation process for trafficking survivors. And that is a process set in by statute, whereby law enforcement or established social and legal services can provide referrals to our agency and to our partner, the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA. And so through that line of work, I see hundreds of referrals every year. Each of them is a unique situation and a unique person's experiences in trafficking. So, I would say that it really varies a lot, the types of scenarios that we see. And I may have forgotten your original question, so remind me what that was.
So the original question is, how do we distinguish between someone who is voluntarily participating in sex work and sex labor versus someone who is being trafficked?
We see a lot of referrals for individuals who, for example, initially started in sex work, maybe because of lack of financial resources or other types of personal circumstances, and that's something that they stated that they willingly chose to pursue and enter. But in those referrals, a lot of times we see that quickly evolves into a situation of exploitation. where the person no longer has control of the money that they're earning, for example, or control of the johns that they're allowed to see or not see. There's often no control either of their movement, so they are being transported by traffickers or some other individual to specific hotels or locations to go on dates, with johns. And so the control that they had over their day-to-day lives slowly disappears. And they often find that they have little to no money left in their pocket because all of those funds are being taken away by the traffickers. And again, because of the force, fraud, and coercion piece, oftentimes there is physical violence involved as well, either by the traffickers or the johns when the person is not, when they don't perceive that the person is complying with their demands. So I think those are two separate things, sex work and trafficking, but it can often lead, one thing can often lead to another.
A gateway,
Exactly.
Yeah, just taking in that situation and that person as a whole and really seeing, again, do they really have a choice? And is there the elements of fraud, coercion, or anything like that? And just, again, seeing what their day-to-day life is like and being able to distinguish between that.
JoLynn, can you speak a little bit more about that? Because the reference to comprehensive that you just mentioned, to me that sounds like very important work that needs to happen. How are you able to do or perform that comprehensive assessment in order to get to the information that you need in order to make a determination?
And I think you could talk more about that as well, but again, just building that rapport with the person and having those conversations, establishing that trust, and then again, asking those kind of tough questions. It's not, just kind of going through a checklist and sitting there with them, but again, just having them talk and letting them know, talk to us about what their life is like from day to day, and just again, establishing what that is and giving them the resources that they might need.
Would you say that your agency and the state troopers, the police departments have the same approach in terms of collecting that type of information from survivors? Or the same training and the same background in terms of how you differentiate between someone who may be coming from a sex work background versus a human trafficking background? Because it sounds like when you're in this like a comprehensive approach where you're building rapport, I want to know.
Very victim-centered, very trauma-informed, and that kind of thing.
Is it the same thing on the state police side?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Could you describe that process a little bit?
Just in terms of, interviewing victims, like talking to them, trying to get them to, well, you know what, the same but different, I guess, let me say that. You always wanna try to be sensitive, you wanna try to, be as compassionate as possible, as delicate as possible, because when you're dealing with sex crimes, things of that nature, it's traumatizing. It's a delicate, sensitive situation. But by the same token, like, we are also looking from a criminal aspect. We're also looking to try to like hit certain points. Like we need to cover certain elements. Like we need to, be able to, it's almost a little more technical for us. Because we are trying to determine, is this sex trafficking? Is this, and in your course, is it sex trafficking and rape versus sodomy? You know what I mean? Like everything is so, like, by the book, and you want to make sure that, you're including the proper culpable mental states and all those things. So I think the same but different, I guess would be my answer.
And I think the police have a harder job in that aspect because, it's somewhat easier for us to kind of get that rapport and get the victim to trust us, especially again when we're talking about, a lot of the victims being people of color and that distrust of the whole criminal justice system. They might not be really willing to talk to the police. They are afraid of getting in trouble. A lot of times, you know, the traffickers utilize the police as a threatening thing, like, oh, I'm just gonna call the cops and you're gonna get arrested, or you say anything, you're gonna be the one going down. And so it can be really difficult for them to be able to open up and trust an officer right away. So I think it makes it difficult.
And a lot comes with that too. So once you trust the officer, you talk to the officer, it doesn't stop there. Then it moves forward, and in order for, you know, me to build a case and for it to be prosecuted, it repeats. You have to, you know, say it again. You have to face your accuser. You have to, you know what I mean? It's a lot of things that people may oftentimes are reluctant. They're not willing to do, and you know, I don't even know if you can fault them for that. You know.
And this is such an important conversation where you know these two systems and approaches align and intersect and converge with, you know, I'm drawing into my intimate partner violence, sexual assault advocacy days and work, where one, you know, the foundational principle is believing what is being shared, and then again and it's part of like the case and moving a case forward to be critical with details and information while understanding the human perspective, and you're talking to a real individual who has been harmed, who has been, a crime has been committed against them, and sometimes the victim may not even see that. So, you know, having this coordinated response and approaches to working with, you know, survivors of trafficking.
It's so important, so important. And when you mentioned earlier the comprehensive model that you use, how does bringing housing and healthcare and all those other necessary services, how does that like help someone who is a survivor of trafficking?
Again, a lot of times these people are kind of forced into that because they don't have that stability. You know, homeless and unsheltered youth are one of the biggest vulnerable populations, and so kind of wrapping as many resources around them as possible to create that kind of safety net. So we have case managers at work. Obviously housing is the biggest issue and unfortunately the lowest resource available, but working with that and trying to, again, employment services, you know, GED or further education. So trying to get them as many resources wrapped around them, counseling, whatever that looks like, support groups, peer support groups, so they can, you know, learn and work with each other and not just like, you know, again, it's still that power imbalance. Like, we're the experts and, you know, we're like trying to, you know, fix their lives, but really they're the experts in what they need and what work is gonna work for them. That's why we very much try a victim-centered model. We're not telling them, you have to do this, this, and that. Like, here are your options, here are some resources, what's gonna work for you? And we come at it from that angle. But again, just trying to get them as much support as possible and what that looks like for each person.
So this question kind of leads us back to the conversation that we opened up with in part one, where we started to talk a little bit about different systems and their approach towards, you know, human trafficking, sex trafficking. What specific policy recommendations would each of you recommend that might help bridge the gap so that folks get the services that they need? We also talked about earlier about how laws being located in different places and you know, different, you know, how that plays a role into this dynamic.
And so as somebody from a state agency, I'm not sure that I can speak exactly to policy choices that lawmakers and perhaps my commissioner may make, but I think I just want to highlight the great work that a lot of our partners in the state are already doing and that I hope will continue in the years moving forward. So for example, New York State has an interagency task force on human trafficking, which is comprised of 11 different state agencies. State police is one of them, and has been an active participant in all of our meetings. And through that task force, DCJS and OTDA are the two co-chairs of the task force. So through the task force, we really explore many different facets of human trafficking around the state, try to collect data from various state agencies, which, as you can imagine, is not a straight line, a straightforward task. I think all of us have different metrics with which we collect data, and our data asks different questions, and so it's not completely streamlined, but that's the great thing about having a task force of different partners, is we can talk and discuss what each of us has, what resources and what data each of us has, and fill in that puzzle with all of our missing pieces. So I think that is a great opportunity that we have in the state, and the legislature just extended the validity of the task force. It was set to expire last year, and now it's been extended until 2027. So we very much look forward to continuing our great partnership with the state police and all the other state partners that we have on the task force as well.
Have the task force activities translated into the growth of specific educational or prevention efforts that can be used across the board to address this issue?
Yeah, and so I think one of the main campaigns the task force has undertaken is raising social awareness about the issue of trafficking, which sounds very basic, but I think it's so crucial, and it doesn't always reach, the ears of people that maybe need to hear it, and in all pockets of our communities. So, we've got flyers, informational posters, social media campaigns about human trafficking, and really highlighting all the different various scenarios that could be human trafficking, right? Because as we discussed, it's not always the kidnapping, abduction off the street.
People think of
yes.
trafficking as taken.
Yes.
When we taken, like that's their view on it, and that's it.
Exactly, right. So that's a big part of the educational campaign, is to say that that is one scenario. Yes, that is a valid scenario that we have seen in some cases. It is by no means the only scenario by far. So we do that educational campaign, and we also, I think one of the values is that it's a collective state effort. So it's not just one agency putting out that message through, Instagram or their Facebook page or Twitter, but it's a collective effort of all 11 state agencies targeting, different audiences and different constituents. We've got agencies like the Department of Health, Department of Mental Health, Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, state police, many different agencies that touch on trafficking at different angles and in different ways. And I think that is a really valuable partnership to have.
Excellent. If there's anything that we can do as an organization to push forward that information as a community partner,
Thank you.
Please, keep, SORA, in the know, so that we can make sure that the chapter gets that information.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right now, with the task force, what role does survivors play in task force activities?
Yeah, so currently, because the task force is a task force that's created by statute, the statute really lays out the individual departments and agencies and the members that should kind of, go into that task force. So in the statute, there is no official survivor advisory group or anything like that, but we are looking, we obviously value and recognize the unique input that survivors may have. We want people with lived experiences to inform us on policy choices or recommendations, and reporting. So that is definitely an avenue that we are actively exploring, is how we can include and consider survivor voices. I will say that I'm also a participant of various regional human trafficking task force groups, and some of them have survivors as members as well. So although there is no official survivor advisory board right now for the state task force, I think one of my roles is to liaise and bring those voices from the regional groups into the state realm. So I think it's something that we're continuing to work towards, but we absolutely recognize the importance of.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I
was just going to add that, this question is so important in terms of looking at what community-based organizations can do and the bandwidth that community-based organizations have with the education component and being aware. So any community-based organization that has human services as a component and a piece of it, which many do, to be really aware of human trafficking, what it looks like relative to the region communities that they're serving, and then also being able to have those strategic partnerships with agencies and local municipalities to help provide those wraparound services. So I'm thinking, YMCA's, the YWCA's, or actually any community-based organization that is not just their mission-focused objectives of their organization, but they're dealing with community. And so there should be education and awareness incorporated in that as well.
Excellent, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I might be biased, but I think, again, the most important thing, especially in line with policy, is, mandated prevention ed and the funding for it. So again, I'm a team of one, and I go into 8 different districts right now, and at least I'm trying to. But again, getting in that mandatory, because sometimes it's even hard for us to get into schools. It's been like push and a push. But again, having those discussions and those presentations with the kids, and not just like, oh, we'll see them for 30 minutes once a year, and then we did our due diligence. But having that really comprehensive curriculum and getting it into schools, getting into foster parent training, and just having that educational component so we are kind of stopping up those vulnerabilities.
Excellent, so we all do a little bit of lifting, we can have a bigger impact. Yeah, I think that would be excellent. Excellent, to incorporate that into policy. More funding, more education, more coordination. It sounds like coordination is happening through the interagency task force, incorporating survivors' voices and lived experiences, all things that are very important. Incorporating community involvement in the education piece is all important. I have another question in this section, and then we can wrap it up and move on to the third. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was confirmed as the first African-American woman to serve as a justice of the United States Supreme Court on April 7, 2022. During her confirmation hearings, Justice Brown was questioned about her record of deviating from sentencing guidelines in favor of foreign offenders, despite her record being in line, in step with the majority of mainstream judges at the time. Brown stated her issue was specifically that the way people access pornography varies very differently today than when the laws were created. So for example, when the laws were created, people had to physically order their pornography, people had to walk into a store in order to purchase it, right? And now it's been largely become a digital revolution, whereas people can access it at literally at their fingertips, right?
Yeah.
So how has the digital revolution changed the landscape of human trafficking and what you've seen?
Drastically, I would say tremendously, revolutionarily, all those adjectives to try to capture the scope. It's made it, I think, a lot more challenging to detect human trafficking and to find the traffickers behind, screen names or online accounts. There are ways that they can hide their identity more easily now that we can all be on our screens and create a different persona online for ourselves. We do see, particularly with children and young people, that a lot of the grooming from traffickers occurs first online, especially for women or children who are BIPOC or LGBTQ plus, who may not feel that they have a comfortable community from where they are, or if they're not comfortable living in their home environment, they may look for friends or acquaintances online who are in a similar life stage or have similar life experiences as them. And those people on the other side of the screen may not be teenagers or children, but grown adults who are actively looking to target young people by posing as a friend and trying to gain a person's trust, and little by little gaining more personal information about that person and their lives and what adult figures they may have or may not have in their lives, and try to really get a picture of how easy it may be to exploit this person for their own personal gain. So it's opened up a whole new world, unfortunately, for exploitation. But on the other side, I think, we recognize that online services and all these platforms have allowed us to reach different populations from across the world or across the country who may not be in our backyard. And I think that sort of community cannot be understated. That community itself also has value. So it's about, I think, educating caregivers, schools, students, children about how we can use online platforms and how potentially there may be some potential red flags to look out for in certain interactions that we have online.
And it's ever changing. We'll get a handle on one app, and then once we get a handle on that, there's 5 more coming up. We get one, website like Backpage or whatever taken down, and then 20 more take its place. So it's constant and it's ever evolving.
And you're just one person, right? Over 8 counties.
The simple answer is that it's a double-edged sword with this digital revolution, because it provides the ability to access and reach this, tremendous reach that crosses borders, crosses any kind of divide that you would perhaps want to imagine. And for folks looking for connection, it's such an easy way to access individuals. And then on the flip side, really understanding how much information can be culled about an individual once that connection is established, in so many just unseemingly places, from, what your Pinterest likes are to even the private public profile setting of your Facebook page or, TikTok, how much information can be curated to enable a trafficker to, build a strategy to connect. So, it presents that easy opportunity.
I think the nuance is that we want to communicate also that social media is not just all bad, because exactly what you were saying, like there is great value in being able to find community where you might not physically have community near you. So I think communicating that and the nuances of how we can use online platforms and social media is very important. I think there was one study that I had read that was very interesting about children and young people and using smartphones, which was that we often think about as young children, people might have like a safety blanket or like a teddy bear as a go-to item for their own safety and comfort when they need it. The study was about how nowadays a lot of teens and young people see their smartphone as that safety blanket, and they see, which I hadn't thought about before, but when I read that, my mind was blown because it seemed almost obvious, something I hadn't thought about. But it's the social media, the interactions with people, the number of likes that a picture they post gets, and a lot of that drives maybe dopamine kind of cycles, and it just is very addictive. It's very easy to get addicted to getting more likes, to getting more posts, and to getting more friends online. So it's something that we just have to communicate with more nuance, I think, is the message that we want to put forth.
And how does it affect things on the demand side? We know how it can make certain groups more vulnerable, but then also in terms of folks who are taking in this pornographic materials, etc. How does the internet play a role in that?
I mean, I think I don't have a lot of experience from the demand side and looking from that perspective, but I think that from the referrals that we've gotten from the New York State confirmation process I was mentioning earlier, a lot of the initial encounters are online, especially with children, and someone reaches out to them and maybe asks them, you know, hey, send me a picture of yourself or a video, and I'll pay you $200 or something. And so that relationship kind of develops, I think, organically, but very, very quickly, in a way that's almost unnatural, because there's so much online interaction. You can have immediate conversations with somebody, even if they're thousands of miles away. And little by little, all of those interactions lead up to a person potentially feeling like they trust their friend online, who they've never met and you know, don't really know in real life. But I think a lot of the demand can look, you know, can take that shape, is initial contact of asking, soliciting for pictures and videos. A lot of times there's also like webcam. We've seen webcam cases where folks are being forced to upload videos of themselves on certain websites, and then customers or Johns will view those and send them money, most likely sending the traffickers money, not really sending the individuals money themselves. So and we know the internet can also be a place where a lot of, you know, there's a deeper, darker side of the internet as well that maybe all of us are not are aware of. But you know, I'm sure that there are also areas of the internet where certain individuals are particularly active in recruiting who they think are vulnerable, children or women or adults. And you know, there's probably a network somewhere. I'm sure everything is on the internet these days, where people, you know, kind of work together to exploit individuals.
And I think on the demand side, you'll find that there's that same addiction. The same way that you would see that the addiction to the likes and the, you know, the sense of self-worth that gives you. On the flip side, the demand is an addiction too. I mean, it'll give you, you know, it'll help to feed, you know, your need for control, if that's your type of thing, or, you know, some people are habitual, addicted warriors, it'll feed that, you know what I mean? It's absolutely a two-sided, double-edged sword, and the supply and the demand, both an addiction, or can be.
And, you know, another component of this demand component, just in terms of the work that I've done with young people, is that it normalizes it, right? So you're just, you know, some of them are so used to getting requests for pictures, requests for videos, that that's just something that happens when I'm online, as opposed to a flag that something bigger and more nefarious is happening at the time. So, you know, and I think for young people, that is because, you know, social media is such a big part of all of our culture, but for their culture especially, just it normalizes behavior that would otherwise be deemed inappropriate, predatory, you know, and not necessarily using that language to name it as such, but it really does. It's like, oh, that's not a big deal. Yeah, I get, you know, requests for pictures all of the time, or requests for videos all of the time. And, you know, I might meet up with someone who wants to, who has promised to put me in a video, and they're going to take me somewhere out of whatever the local area is to be in a video. And this is for young people that I've talked to and worked with, not recognizing that could be the very beginning of grooming, and perhaps it lead to a trafficking situation.
And that's not just young people.
Yeah,
that's adults too. It's common now for full-grown adults.
Very
somebody, the next thing you know, they're in your DM, send me a picture. Like, that's just
very true. That's very
status quo, and it's very much normalized. So,
as each of you speak, I'm just thinking, I don't know if I would have been able to negotiate all of this 18 and under myself personally, but this is a lot to handle for young people.
And we're asking kids whose brains aren't even fully formed to deal with
Right, I
this.
need to hold space for that. These are very serious sorts of approaches that people are making to our young people, and they're having to figure out, like, is this good or not? And it seems like they're using many of the same approaches that you guys use in crime victims, in terms of building the rapport. Like, they have everything sort of mapped out, build a rapport, meeting people where they're at, you know, their needs and stuff like like that, so it's like, how do you combat that?
I wish these perpetrators were as stupid as we want them to be, but they're extremely smart. People think that, you know, they're idiots and that kind of thing, but like, no, they unfortunately know what they're doing, and that's why we have this problem.
Savvy and with operations behind, you know, so those two pieces.
So with that, I know we're not going to be able to save the world tonight, but the purpose of this was really to bring greater awareness and to foster communication around, you know, what does the stigma look like? What does human trafficking look like in regards to our region and how it's impacting young people in our region? So part of the reason we want to just talk a little bit more about that stigma. How does it develop, right? How and how do we develop more of an empathy-based and trauma-based approach to how we serve people so that we can improve things? So let's start with Bobbie. Do you want to talk a little bit about the first part of the question in terms of, in your practice, do you see that there's a certain stigma attached to someone saying, I'm a survivor of human trafficking?
I wouldn't say that there's such a stigma. I would say that, so even in coming here, like when I was invited to come and they sent the invitation, I'm like, you know, I don't know about human sex trafficking, because like was mentioned before, when most people think of it, they think about it in terms of taking. They think about it in terms of people being dragged across the border or things like that. So, in being in this room, and I did start kind of reading and researching a little bit before I came, so I would be a little more familiar. I started thinking of instances where I'm like, oh no, that was trafficking, and that was trafficking. Relatives, people who I know personally, and I'm like, oh no, So, with that being said, I think with the conversation being had, I think it's important that people realize how vast the umbrella is with respect to human trafficking. Because when you hear about all the different instances and the way different shapes and forms that it can take, it lets you know that, we all know survivors. I think for me, that's like the biggest takeaway, and that was like one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to come anyway, even when I felt like, I don't know, because I felt like maybe I could go and learn. But even in being here, it's like, yeah, a lot of this stuff is stuff I already knew. And I think it's important that it's translated to society exactly, all the different ways that a person can be trafficked, and all the different ways that, it can happen, and all the different instances in which, this is in fact sex trafficking. I think people need to know all the different faces that it can take, and that will help to make it more relatable. Because when you hear it and it's not relatable, it makes people, not want to hear it. People care about what they know about, what they relate to. So I guess for me, that's.
Would you say it's easier then to kind of go into like investigative mode where you're collecting data versus necessarily treating the person comprehensively, like this is someone who's experienced trauma versus this is a criminal?
Yep.
Thank you for that. That distinction is very important. I think that like a light bulb just went off for me. So tell us a little bit, because I think when we hear trauma, we think, okay, someone was just scared, right? But trauma is a physical response of your body that your prefrontal cortex shuts down, right? And you begin using your amygdala in order to process and respond to a fear. And so the ones that we are used to hearing about is the flight or fright, right? But there's also fawn and there's also freeze, right? And so if you're having someone who's in front of you who has experienced a traumatic event, they may not be able to tell tell and explain what happened to them at all. They may need time to adjust, they may need time to, you know, be safe, feel safe,
Yeah.
get the services and supports that they need. So with that having been said, how can we, is there an opportunity here to shift education, or is that education being shared across all the interagency task force members, et cetera, in order to give survivors the best care that they need?
I'll actually share, for April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we're actually doing a lot of trainings with our local police station. And one of the biggest things we do focus on is that neurobiology of trauma. And just letting them know they're not going to get that quote unquote perfect victim. And just because they're not acting the way you think they should be, that doesn't mean that something didn't happen. I had an officer come up to me when I first started as an advocate and say, well, she's sitting there laughing and cracking jokes, so obviously it couldn't have been that bad. I'm like, no, I bet you if you took some blood from her right now, you see a lot of oxytocin in her system. Our bodies are amazing, and they do whatever they can to protect us. So we might have that adrenaline to have that fight or flight response. We might have that cortisol and oxytocin to ease the pain because your body doesn't want to react to what's happening and know what's happening to it. So we have all that going on in our head. And like you said, our rational brain gets shut off. So, you know, we'll say, well, they passed 5 different police stations on the way home. Why didn't they just go to the police? They weren't thinking rationally. They were like, I need to survive, and this is how I'm going to. They get that kind of tunnel vision. And so we talk to them, the police, a lot about that. We talk about interview styles. We talk about being trauma informed. We also talk about, you know, how the memories are encoded different. And so really focusing, you know, and we get it that the police have a job to do, and they need that information in order to do that job. But asking who, what, when, where, and why, and what happened next, and what happened after that, doesn't work when they're still in that trauma mode. And accessing those sensory details. So saying, what were you looking at? What were you focused on? What could you smell? What could you hear? And that elicits more memory than saying, okay, what happened next? What position were you in? How did they grab you? How long was that? It all gets distorted. So adding, asking those questions in a sensory way can really help elicit those details better. And so we do a lot of training along that line.
So important, so important. Any other comments?
I think I would just say that labels matter when we think about survivors of trafficking or domestic violence, or really any kind of crime. So, you know, I think part of, you were mentioning police training, when we think about the word prostitute, for example, there are certain notions that may come to mind when a police officer thinks that they've encountered someone known as a prostitute. But I think that would be a great opportunity to, using culturally sensitive and trauma-informed approaches, to dig a little bit deeper. We talked about the differentiation between sex work and trafficking, and how the lines can often be blurred, or one can lead to another. So it's important, I think, to recognize that not all prostitutes are perhaps engaging voluntarily in sex work, and so some of them may in fact be sex trafficked. And we can't just rely on the label of one word to really define a person's value or worth in society. I also just want to highlight that DCJS is a part of the Municipal Police Training Council, MPTC, and in 2021, the MPTC released a model policy on human trafficking for municipal police departments. So it's a model policy. It's not, you know, everyone has to use this policy necessarily, but it's a tool for local police departments and really any law enforcement agency to have a model policy, a guide for them to build off of, and includes you know, information about interviewing techniques and providing safety for the interviewee before commencing any type of interview about sexual exploitation or human trafficking, and just again, you home the notions of culturally sensitive trauma-informed approaches.
I would add on to that, culturally specific approaches and services is so important, and again, it's not based on stereotypical biases, but really understanding the correlation of environment. So, the example that you just shared about passing 5 police stations, on the way home, and then perhaps calling 5 people before even making a call, and understanding that from, again, a historic context, that there may be certain institutions or places and spaces that are not deemed safe spaces, or even language used when, even doing initial case management. What kinds of questions are you asking? How are you asking the questions? What kind of room are you in? What is the lighting? Who is asking the question? All of these things matter.
Absolutely. So this is the final question before we go out to the audience to see if there's more. How can we empower and support Black and Indigenous women and girls who have been, who are survivors? How do we help them seek justice and healing in a system that, if we're gonna be honest, does not always prioritize their needs? Who'd like to tackle this? It's a loaded question, and it's loaded for a reason, so.
I think a big portion of it is just being transparent, and communicating information about human trafficking and exploitation in a language and a way that people understand from all different age groups, right? The way that we're talking about trafficking today, right now at this presentation, may not jive as well with, a 10-year-old, for example, or a preteen or a teenager. And so just being cognizant of age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate communication and language to more effectively reach those ears that need to hear this message. And also just, again, being transparent about services that are available to them, bringing awareness that it's not okay for someone to say these things to you, or to ask you to do certain things, or to make you feel uncomfortable, and telling them that they have certain rights, and making sure that there are trusted adults or resources in their community that they know that they can go to in advance, having knowledge of that in advance, just in case something happens, or in case they need to run away from home, or a bad situation. So I think a large part of that is communicating to folks in a way that is effective and that they can understand and that is compelling, but also very transparent, and being clear that the state and cities and municipalities offer resources for them, and that they are survivors and victims, and that they are empowered to seek services.
Simple answer is believe them. Believe them. Affirm and validate the experiences that are being shared, without using language that somehow indicates or may be perceived or come across that they have been in some way, shape, or form complicit to their own victimization. I think that's really important.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I think that was the most important thing, is believe them. Hold our systems and these perpetrators accountable, advocate and make sure that we are making sure that they're heard, uplifting their voices.
We'll take a few questions from, is there any questions from the audience?
Well, I don't necessarily have a question. I just want to thank the chapter for putting on this program, and just making an observation. The reason why I came, I'm a parent of 2 daughters. One is 18, getting ready to go to college, and the other is she'll be 10. So I'm in a space where, one is leaving home, one is still here, and the examples that you brought up about, the social media and just being, accessible, and, sending a picture, and, especially with my 10-year-old, I'm very particular about, what are you on, what are you watching, who are you interfacing with, and then, for my 18-year-old who's,
gonna be leaving, you know, making sure that she's aware of who she's around. So, you know, your example about like a cheerleader, so like your friends, you know, the people who you're meeting with, you know, oh, let's go hang out, you know, oh, let's go hang out with my friend or my, you know, just being aware of who you're with and where you are going. And, you know, the example I just said, it's not like taking. It could be, you know, you and a really good friend are hanging out and it's like, oh, let's go hang out with my friends, we're into this. And, you know, like you said, you know, as a college student, to be, you know, not having money. So, oh, if you know, download this app and, you know, people will pay you for your picture or pay you to see your feet or, you know, those kind of things, you know, just kind of being aware of it. And just, you know, for me as a parent, being aware of what they're getting into, certain language that they're using and communicating with people. So I definitely came to just kind of give some more advice on things that I just need to be aware of as a parent, and just looking out for certain behaviors, and just, again, like behaviors, keywords for, you know, me to just be aware of too, you know. And if I see that stuff happening, language is very important to let, you know, both my kids know that you know, it's a safe space to open up to me and, you know, communicate whatever their needs are, you know, any difficulties that they may be going through. So I thank the panel for, you know, being very honest about what's going on.
Thank you for coming. Does anyone have anything to say in response?
I want to just quickly mention that it's so great to hear about your perspective as a parent of two, I would say, young ladies who are, you know, 8 years or so apart. And I think in New York, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have a law called Aaron's Law, which mandates education in public schools on sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, and hopefully including a component on trafficking as well. And that's mandated in grades K through 8. So perhaps your younger daughter and other individuals in that age range will have that presentation or class course component if they haven't already. And I think what's valuable about that is it hopefully will create an opportunity for the students themselves and the parents to provide feedback. Are they seeing that it's working? Is this curriculum helpful? Are they understanding the content? Do they have questions about what this all means? Do they want to learn more? Do they want to see, you know, it communicated to them in different ways that's more effective? So I think that is a great opportunity for parents and people in the community to provide feedback and to make sure that, yes, the education is happening. How does my child feel about it, and how are they receiving it?
I want to applaud you for having these candid and open conversations with your children. I cannot tell you how much I hear from parents that they're just not willing to hold space for, you know, and it's for a lot of different reasons. Like, people are busy, people have lots of things going on, and just opening up that conversation can sometimes feel very overwhelming, right? But the fact that you are open to having those conversations and kind of going through some of the scenarios that they may be confronted with, I think that is definitely, it has to be applauded. It's definitely, you're going in the right direction there.
And just to chime in really quickly,
oh,
sorry.
One second. So what I was gonna say is, from my experience as a social worker, if you're not having conversations with your children, then someone else is having conversations. And so the fact that you're having those conversations, I think, is definitely a great starting point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I also wanted to bring up, so the counterpart to Aaron's Law on college settings is Title IX. Title IX governs any sort of gendered crime that happens on campus. Anyone that's coming on campus as a freshman all the way through your PhD, there are required trainings that they have to take. The office itself has, depending on the setup of the office, they do have private settings where students can go and have these discussions with counselors, just depending on the capacity of the school. So when your daughter does go to school, those trainings are available, those people are available. God forbid anything happens to her, or if she knows anyone that something may have happened to.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
Oh, I did have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So we are in a room full of women, and the gender that is missing, that is honestly, did I say question?
Carry on.
Gender that is missing that honestly, I mean, if we say it out loud, right, is most prevalent, that is on the trafficker side, are men. So the same way we have a conversation about how we all know someone that was sexually assaulted, but if you ask a man, they don't know any abusers, right? How do we have this conversation with men? How do we share this information in a way that is digestible for them to understand? Because part of society is really getting them to understand that these things are happening to women at an alarming rate, and these things we need to put a stop to this.
Who would like to tackle that question?
I'll start. I'll start from a broad-based way. There is an incredible organization, and it's called The Call to Men, led by two Black men, Tony Porter and Ted Bunch, that their work is centered on having these conversations around intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and trafficking with men in spaces. They have partnerships with a lot of the athletic leagues. They do trainings for the athletic leagues. They're in school. So I put that out there as like a broad-based resource, and that's a call to men. I would also say that it is really important to have the conversation and discussion that we're having today or this evening, and being able to draw the connection with examples that may not first resonate with someone as trafficking, sexual assault, intimate partner violence. What are the elements and forms of abuse? Having those conversations in our own spaces, right? So I'm a mother of 3 sons. 2 are in college, 1 is in high school, and you talk about if you're not having the conversation, someone else will. I mean, it is, if you were to poll them, they would say, oh my goodness, we get it, we understand. And it's constantly going through scenarios with them, or even when they're sharing their examples of, being in social settings and, kind of picking that apart so they understand, and doing the same with our partners in terms of the response that, no, we don't know anyone that has been trafficked, we don't know anyone who's been assaulted, sexually assaulted, and no, I don't know if that's domestic violence, intimate partner violence, I don't think it rises to that. Having those kind of conversations in our own immediate spaces with the men that we are connected to, and again, then, elevating that from a community platform as well.
I echo all of that 100%. I love A Call to Men and Tony Porter. We're actually in partnership with the library doing a empowerment group for teen boys. And so we're gonna be using that Live Respect curriculum. And again, I have a 10-year-old son, and it really does start with that whole conversation about respect and consent. And this kid has been learning about consent, maybe not that in that way, in that word, but he's been learning about consent since he was 2. Like, it's just an ongoing conversation. But I think it really does start with that concept of consent and respect, and making sure that we are having those boundaries respected of ours, and we're respecting other people's boundaries.
I would say, and I'm also a mother of 2 sons, I think it's very important that, we educate our boys at a young age and keep them informed. And I know a lot of times I have the conversation with my husband, and he always felt like, as a young man, as a young boy, he wasn't taught like the self-worth and self-awareness within his own body. Like, and he feels like, a lot of, women are always taught that, their body is a temple and it should be, preserved, whereas men are never taught that. And he feels like a lot of times that initial teaching, like if men were given the same sense of, reserve and self-worth, and to let them know that, they too are worth the wait, and all those different things, it would absolutely improve the dynamic between the 2 genders. So it's very important for us to, you know, instill, you know, identity and, you know, boundaries and all those things in our young men too. Because if they don't have those same teachings and ideologies, it's hard for them to then, you know, transfer that to their partners or in their intimate relationships. So it's very important too that, you know, we, you know, make our sons know that, you know, they're a priority and they should be respected, and in turn, respect gets respect, you know, so.
That's right. Bobbie, your last comment just like gave me goosebumps. That was so powerful. Yes.
I can't take credit for them. I have a man at home who has very strong feelings.
So, Julina, wow. Anzala, Alozie, Bobbie, Alexander, and JoLynn Bex. I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. This is like a conversation like amongst girlfriends at like brunch. And so thank you for being so honest and so open and so real with us so that we can have a better understanding of what's happening here. We want to thank you on behalf of, once again, the Albany, New York Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. There are over 350,000 members across 6 of the 7 continents. And so we bring you greetings and we say farewell on behalf of our chapter president, Sorasalika Y. Grant, Esquire. Thank you so much for joining us.